On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected.
Thank you to all our amazing channel members for your generous support.
Suzanne Somers, beloved actress, author, and entrepreneur, passed away on October 15, 2023 at the age of 76, just one day before her birthday. She died peacefully at her home in Palm Springs, California, after a long and courageous battle with breast cancer. Somers' passing reflected both her resilience and her lifelong advocacy for alternative health and wellness approaches, a philosophy she embraced publicly even in the face of controversy. Her death became a moment of reflection on the intersection between celebrity, health, and the evolving conversation around how individuals confront illness in the public eye. Rising to fame in the 1970s as the lovable Chrissy Snow on Three's Company, Somers became a symbol of optimism and independence at a time when women were increasingly redefining their place in popular culture. Her comedic timing and charm made her a household name, but her later disputes over pay equity — she was fired from Three's Company after demanding a salary equal to her male co-star — also positioned her as an early advocate for gender equality in Hollywood. In many ways, Somers' career mirrored the growing confidence and assertiveness of women in the entertainment industry and beyond. The immediate reaction to her passing was one of warmth and nostalgia. Fans and fellow actors celebrated her humor, strength, and unapologetic authenticity. Tributes poured in across social media, highlighting not only her television legacy, but also her influence as a wellness entrepreneur. Through her books, fitness programs, and product lines, she helped redefine aging and body image in American culture. Even as critics questioned her embrace of unconventional health practices, Somers' voice represented a generational shift toward personal empowerment and holistic living, a perspective that resonated deeply with millions. Her death, occurring just as she prepared to celebrate another year of life surrounded by family, underscored the poignancy of mortality's timing. Yet, it also reaffirmed how art, humor, and love allow individuals to transcend it. Suzanne Somers' life story reflects humanity's enduring struggle to balance vitality and vulnerability, to fight against time while accepting its inevitability. In her laughter, her resilience, and her insistence on living life on her own terms, Somers embodied a kind of immortality. Through reruns, interviews, and the cultural memory of Three's Company, her spirit continues to radiate warmth, a reminder that joy itself can be a form of legacy. Mata Hari, born Margareta Gertruda Zell in 1876, remains one of the most enigmatic and controversial figures of the early 20th century. Her death on October 15, 1917, by firing squad in Vincennes, France, was both violent and theatrical, an ending that seemed almost destined for a woman whose life blurred the lines between fact and performance. Convicted of espionage during World War I, Mata Hari was accused of passing military secrets to Germany while working as a courtesan and dancer in Paris. Though evidence against her was largely circumstantial, she became a convenient scapegoat in a time of paranoia, fear, and national desperation. Her execution reflected the moral and political anxieties of her era. Europe in 1917 was collapsing under the weight of war fatigue and suspicion. Loyalty and identity were constantly questioned. Mata Hari, a Dutch woman who freely moved among powerful men, soldiers, and diplomats, embodied the modern woman: independent, sexually liberated, and unapologetically self-directed. To the French authorities, she represented both a tangible threat and a symbolic one. Executing her was not merely an act of punishment. It was a statement about control, gender, and the consequences of defying societal norms. Witnesses to her death described her calm demeanor, her refusal of a blindfold, and her defiant poise as she faced the firing squad. This final act cemented her myth as a figure of mystery and courage. The immediate reaction to her death was polarized. Some saw her as a traitor who endangered lives, while others viewed her as a tragic victim of wartime hysteria. Over time, historians and biographers have increasingly leaned toward the latter view, portraying her as a pawn in a political game rather than a mastermind spy. Mata Hari's death amplified her legend far beyond her life's achievements. She became the archetype of the femme fatale, inspiring novels, films, and operas that romanticized her story. Her image, half saint, half seductress, reveals humanity's fascination with the intersection of sexuality, power, and betrayal. Ultimately, Mata Hari's story reminds us how societies project their fears and fantasies onto women who defy convention. In death, she became larger than life, a symbol of how history can immortalize not only deeds, but myths. Through her, we see that memory often blurs truth, yet it is precisely this ambiguity that allows legends to endure long after their mortal lives have ended. Betty Driver, a beloved British actress and singer, passed away peacefully on October 15, 2011, at the age of 91. Her death marked the end of an era for millions of fans who had come to see her as the warm and resilient heart of Coronation Street, where she played the iconic barmaid Betty Williams for over 4 decades. Her passing from natural causes reflected not tragedy, but the quiet dignity of a life lived fully and authentically, a rare and comforting end for someone so long in the public eye. Driver's life and death mirrored the values of her generation: endurance, loyalty, and a deep sense of community. Having begun her career as a child performer in the 1920s, she lived through the upheavals of World War II, post-war austerity, and the shifting cultural tides of the 20th century. By the time she joined Coronation Street in 1969, she embodied the steadfast, down-to-earth character of northern working-class Britain. Her famous hot pot became more than a dish. It was a symbol of warmth and togetherness, qualities that defined both her character and her personal ethos. The immediate aftermath of her death was one of national mourning. Fans, co-stars, and even members of Parliament paid tribute to her contributions to British culture. Her funeral in Manchester was attended by friends, family, and hundreds of admirers who had grown up with her on television. For many, her death represented more than the loss of an actress. It was the passing of a familiar presence who had bridged generations and anchored a national institution. Driver's legend was not amplified through scandal or myth, but through constancy. She stood as a reminder that greatness can lie in reliability and grace, rather than in drama or reinvention. In an age increasingly defined by transient fame, her legacy underscored the power of consistency and connection, the values of a Britain she helped represent both on and off-screen. In remembering Betty Driver, we confront humanity's gentler relationship with mortality, that a life of kindness and perseverance can echo just as powerfully as one marked by glamour or tragedy. She is immortalized not through monuments but through memory, her laughter, her warmth, and her place in millions of living rooms. In this way, her spirit endures, woven into the fabric of everyday life, just as her character once was in Coronation Street. Delphine Seyrig, the French actress and feminist icon, passed away on October 15, 1990, at the age of 58 after a battle with lung cancer. Her death, though from natural causes, felt symbolic of a generation of artists whose work challenged conventions of gender, art, and identity in post-war Europe. Seyrig's passing marked the loss of one of French cinema's most enigmatic and intellectually engaged figures. A woman who defied both the glamour and the constraints of the film industry. Born in Beirut and raised in a multicultural environment, Seyrig emerged as a muse of the French New Wave, particularly through her haunting role in Alain Resnais's Last Year at Marienbad, 1961. Her ethereal, almost otherworldly performances embodied the avant-garde spirit of the 1960s, a period when cinema sought to dismantle traditional storytelling and explore the unconscious. Yet Seyrig was never merely an actress. She was a political voice, a documentarian, and a feminist who used her platform to critique the very structures that shaped her career. Her death came at a time when France was re-examining the role of women in media and society. Seyrig had spent much of the 1970s working on feminist projects, including Sois belle et tais-toi, Be Pretty and Shut Up, a documentary that exposed the systemic sexism of the film industry through interviews with actresses. Her illness and death reflected not only personal tragedy, but also the vulnerability of those who had fought tirelessly for change in an era still dominated by patriarchal norms. The immediate response to her death was one of profound respect and mourning within both artistic and feminist circles. Fellow directors and actors described her as a poetic rebel, while younger filmmakers cited her as a model for combining artistry with activism. In the decades since, Seyrig's influence has deepened. Retrospectives of her work and feminist film archives continue to preserve her legacy, recognizing her as a bridge between cinematic experimentation and social progress. Delphine Seyrig's death invites reflection on humanity's relationship with mortality and memory. She reminds us that artistic immortality is not about fame but resonance, about using one's craft to question and transform. Through film festivals, feminist studies, and the enduring allure of her performances, Seyrig lives on as a reminder that art's truest power lies in its ability to outlast the body, carrying forward ideas that refuse to die. Frank Dova, an American character actor best known for his rugged roles in westerns and dramas, died of heart failure on October 15, 1981, at the age of 71. His death, though natural, symbolized the fading of a particular Hollywood era, the mid-20th century period when television and film were deeply fascinated with the myth of the American frontier. Dova's passing marked the quiet end of a career that reflected both the artistry and the stereotypes of his time. Born in New York City in 1910, Dova built his reputation as a versatile performer, often cast in roles that captured the cultural imagination of post-war America. His most memorable performance came as Chief Wild Eagle in the satirical TV series F Troop, 1965 to 1967, a role that blended humor and parody at a time when westerns dominated American screens. Although his character leaned on the caricatured depictions common to the period, Dova's wit and charisma elevated the part, revealing his ability to navigate complex cultural terrain with subtlety and intelligence. Dova's death reflected a broader transition in American entertainment. By the early 1980s, Hollywood had begun to move away from the Western mythos that defined much of Dova's generation of actors. The old archetypes of cowboys, lawmen, and noble savages were giving way to more introspective and diverse storytelling. His passing, therefore, not only represented the loss of a respected performer, but also underscored the cultural shift from nostalgia for the frontier to a more critical view of its legacy. The immediate reaction to his death was understated, typical of a working actor who had spent decades shaping stories from the background rather than the spotlight. Yet, among his peers and fans, Dova was remembered fondly as a craftsman, reliable, versatile, and deeply human. His performances endure as part of a cinematic language that defined mid-century American identity, where masculinity, humor, and myth intertwined on screen. In reflecting on Dova's death, we see how even those outside the ranks of stardom contribute profoundly to collective memory. Humanity's relationship with mortality and fame is often measured by grand gestures, yet Dova reminds us that legacy can also lie in consistency, authenticity, and the quiet shaping of cultural stories. Through television reruns, archival footage, and the enduring love of Western enthusiasts, Frank Dova remains an emblem of a bygone but foundational chapter in Hollywood's history. Ralph Truman, an English actor renowned for his commanding voice and presence, died at the age of 66 in England. His death was attributed to natural causes, marking a quiet end to a career defined by authority and precision. Truman was best known for his roles in historical and adventure films, often portraying figures of power or moral rigidity, a reflection of the mid-20th century British cinematic fascination with empire, duty, and discipline. His passing, though not sudden or scandalous, represented the fading of an era in British film history when classical delivery and theatrical gravitas defined acting on screen. Truman's death came at a time when British cinema was undergoing significant transformation. The late 1970s marked a shift toward grittier realism and social commentary, moving away from the stately, performance-driven films that had characterized his generation. Actors like Truman, trained in the traditions of the stage, represented a bridge between the old theatrical world and the emerging modern screen culture. His departure, therefore, symbolized not just the end of a life, but the closing of a chapter in British performance history, a time when diction, authority, and restraint were the highest marks of craft. In the wake of his death, Truman's work continued to resonate among those who valued the craft of classical performance. His roles in films such as King Henry V, 1944, and Treasure Island, 1950, captured a sense of moral steadfastness and national identity that mirrored post-war Britain's search for stability. While he may not have achieved the same global fame as some of his contemporaries, his legacy endures in the archetypes he embodied: the soldier, the leader, the voice of reason in times of turmoil. Truman's death reminds us of how mortality quietly reshapes cultural memory. Figures like him, artists whose contributions often serve as the scaffolding of an era, are rarely immortalized through grand memorials, but through the continued influence of their work. In film, their cadence and presence echo long after they are gone. Through performances preserved on celluloid, Truman remains alive in the dialogue between past and present, reminding us that art, in its truest form, is a defiance of time. Carlo Gambino, one of the most powerful and calculating mafia bosses in American history, died on October 15, 1976, of natural causes at his home in Massapequa, New York. He was 74 years old. His death stood in stark contrast to the violent ends met by many of his contemporaries, figures like Albert Anastasia and Crazy Joe Gallo, who were gunned down in public. Gambino's peaceful passing in his own bed symbolized his mastery of quiet control and strategic survival, traits that defined his reign over organized crime for decades. Born in Sicily, Gambino rose through the underworld ranks with precision and patience, becoming head of the notorious Gambino crime family in the 1950s. Unlike flamboyant gangsters who craved attention, he operated in the shadows, avoiding the limelight and law enforcement scrutiny. His natural death was almost poetic, a final act of defiance in a world ruled by bullets and betrayals. It reflected his deep understanding of the era's changing dynamics. As law enforcement intensified its pursuit of the mafia through wiretaps and RICO laws, Gambino adapted, retreating into discretion while others fell. The immediate consequences of his passing were seismic within organized crime. His death triggered a quiet but fierce power struggle, eventually leading to Paul Castellano's succession, an event that would indirectly pave the way for John Gotti's violent rise in the 1980s. Gambino's absence left a vacuum in leadership that altered the balance of power in the mafia world, pushing it toward a more volatile, media-exposed age. His death, therefore, did not just end a life. It ended an era of silent, calculating governance within the criminal hierarchy. Gambino's story reveals much about humanity's relationship with mortality and power. While his life was defined by control, his death underscored the universal truth that even the most elusive figures cannot escape time. Yet, society continues to immortalize such men through films, literature, and cultural mythology, depicting them as complex anti-heroes rather than mere criminals. Through this lens, Gambino becomes more than a mobster. He becomes a symbol of cunning intellect, restraint, and the paradox of power. In remembering him, we confront our fascination with those who bend morality yet define eras, proof that even in death, influence often outlasts virtue. Rod LaRocque, a leading man of the silent and early sound film era, died of cardiac arrest on October 15, 1969, at the age of 70 in Beverly Hills, California. His passing marked the end of a career that had spanned one of the most transformative periods in cinematic history, from the lavish melodramas of the 1920s to the sophisticated talkies of the 1930s. Dying peacefully of natural causes, LaRocque's departure stood in poignant contrast to the volatile nature of Hollywood fame itself, which often consumed those who struggled to adapt to change. LaRocque's death reflected the quiet dignity with which he had lived his later years. Unlike many of his contemporaries, whose careers crumbled with the advent of sound, LaRocque successfully transitioned into talking pictures, working with notable directors and sharing the screen with stars such as Constance Bennett and William Powell. His ability to adapt mirrored the resilience demanded by his era, a time when technological progress in film threatened to erase entire legacies overnight. In this way, his natural death and relative peace seemed to echo the poise and control that defined both his career and persona. The immediate public response to his passing was subdued, as LaRocque had long retreated from the spotlight. Yet, for those who remembered the golden age of silent cinema, his death symbolized the fading of a generation of pioneers who laid the groundwork for Hollywood's dominance. The studio system that had once built stars like LaRocque was itself beginning to collapse by the late 1960s, making his death feel emblematic of a broader cultural shift, the end of old glamour, replaced by the raw realism of a new Hollywood era. In death, Rod LaRocque became part of Hollywood's nostalgic mythology, a reminder of an age when elegance, discipline, and restraint defined stardom. His story underscores humanity's ongoing fascination with those who bridge eras of change. We immortalize figures like LaRocque not through sensational tragedy, but through the timeless images that capture their grace and adaptability. His death, quiet and unremarkable on the surface, ultimately reflected a larger truth. That legacy often endures not in spectacle, but in the subtle art of survival, both on and off the screen.